I'm Paul McDonald, Chairperson of Australians for Affordable Housing, as well as CEO of Anglicare Victoria. And I thought today I'd take you on just a whistle-stop tour of three researchers that have recently come out. Two of them associated with the Australians for Affordable Housing. One draft, so I'll give you a sneak preview of some of the messages coming out of there, and one that got launched or published about a month ago, and also further research that Anglicare Australia also did, all about housing affordability, all about talking about the narratives of housing affordability. And I think that's what's important here in relation to trying to get attention, gravitas, commitment, is about what is our narrative on housing affordability and how do we start keeping on sort of pitching those, I think, policy advocacy positions through the experience of what's happening out there in Australian communities on housing affordability. First of all, you might say, well, what in the hell is Australians for Affordable Housing? Well, it is a campaign. It's unapologetic about that. So it's a campaign, rather. It doesn't run any programs or services or anything like that. It's purely a campaign for safe, secure and affordable housing. It's made up at the moment of 60 community and housing organisations as a coalition, and counting too, attracting further interest across Australia from organisations and services. And it's funded by donations from members. And so we've been in the orbit of housing affordability for some years now, and it's all purely based on the kind of donations from members and supporters to the campaign. And it's placed and funded by our coalition to say, well, this campaign can say the straight things, can make the advocacy positions without maybe fear or favour in relation to programmatic positions that sometimes gets involved in this sort of area. So no such thing as the plenary. So I'm going to give you a pitch about how to support the campaign at the end. But first of all, I better impress you. So let's go to the... there's some of our supporters. Of course, some of our national supporters, but also in relation to representation, both Adrian Pizarski's on the Australians for Affordable Housing Committee, and also Cassandra here. The AIH, just quickly, has got a 4-point plan. Of course, increase the supply of rental housing. Also improve affordability through taxation reform. And it's interesting to hear the opposition treasurer mention the NG word, negative gearing, and those sort of things. So we're certainly interested in seeing what taxation reform can be done for improve affordability, of course, improve rental assistance. And also the campaigns are both a national, we'll talk at a national, but also relevance to the state about how to deliver affordable housing. We'll assess things like state government budgets. What did they do in relation to affordable housing? What didn't they do? Where's their position or not? The recent studies that I want to tell you about affordable housing is the snapshot, the rental snapshot that Anglicare Australia and Anglicare Victoria, representing Victoria, were involved with. But I'll show you a national rental affordability snapshot just to remind you. And also I've dragged out some of the Queensland messages in there. Also, the Australians for Affordable Housing produced the report in relation to does full-time work guarantee access to affordable housing. So we'll have a look at sort of, if you're in full-time work, what does that measure in relation to affordable housing? And also the draft report, a bit of a sneak preview on if you seek work in higher employment locations, is housing affordable? The Anglicare Australia rental affordability snapshot, I think it was the April the 11th or 12th, or was it the 12th or 13th? But it was a weekend in April, right around Australia, had a look at how many rental properties were being advertised through realestate.com and a couple of other sites that weekend for the communities and population. So each state had a look. 56,000 properties were listed for rent that weekend. And when you have then what was assessed was the measure of excuse me, those on Commonwealth Assist benefits, pensions, etc., and also the minimum wage. And we placed those incomes against what was the rent being sourced, and then the formula of affordable housing or being 30% or below the one's income, looked at how many of those properties were available to those people on those incomes, and whether they could, by that affordable formula, be able to afford those rental properties. Mightn't be any news to you, but for the third year in a row, less than 1% of affordable housing was available to anyone on New Start allowance, parenting payment, even moved into the pensions, age pension and disability support pension. And when you had a look at the minimum wage, and for a family of four, mum, dad and two children, only 8% of properties were affordable on that weekend. When you had a look at South Queensland and Brisbane in particular, and you did that snapshot, again, there was about 5,000 properties listed that weekend. None were affordable. A donut for those on New Start, Austudy or Youth Allowance. Only 29 properties affordable to a couple with two children receiving New Start allowance, and 10% of properties, again, for the dual minimum wage. If you moved up the coast a bit more, Central Queensland, Emerald, Rockhampton and Gladstone, again, a similar story. Donuts for New Start, Austudy or Youth Allowance, and only 15 properties. That's, again, less than 1% affordable to a couple of two children receiving New Start, and 54 properties, 5% for the dual minimum wage. I mean, this tells a story that brings it alive a bit more in relation to the affordable housing about what is available. What can I access? Now, we're not talking about where's your referees and who you're up against or anything like that. We're just taking from the base sort of on the income. And I'm not sure if any of you are involved in housing those on bridging visas and those sort of things. But next year we will take, we're hoping, and certainly Victoria will anyway, we'll take another cut, because it's only about 78% of the Centrelink allowance. We'll take another cut for those on bridging visas and tell that story as well. Because along with the emerging poor story or poverty story here on people with Commonwealth Assist, our citizens who are asylum seekers on bridging visas are copying another 20% hit on their income to try and actually get into affordable housing. If we have a look at another study, Defaulting on the Australian Dream, which looked at full-time work guarantee and access to housing. So if I'm in full-time work, does that mean I'm lifted above those on Centrelink payments and I can actually start to move into affordable housing? What we did, and what the AAH study did, was undertook a cross-reference and looked at the average incomes by occupation at ABS, took a selection of occupations, had a look at the average incomes, and those selection of occupations were made on what were the ones that were basically available through the income ABS crunch that they do each time they do their study. So I'll show you some of the employer occupations. Then we cross-referenced against that on average first home loans by state territory, and also the median capital city rents for cities for units and houses. So again, it's trying to bring a picture or commentary about housing affordability through those who are full-time working, as well as those on Commonwealth Assist, to try and, in a sense, broaden the story about housing affordability, that though we should be troubled by the bottom 10%, the housing affordability is starting to affect those families and those individuals who are also working. We've got median housing, median rent for a house is the far column, median rents for a unit, and average first home loan, housing stress. Who can afford housing at less than 30% of income? Now, the crosses are who can't. And we've got hairdressers, Defence Force members, child carers, cleaners, laundry workers, hospitality workers, prisoners, prison and security officers, human resource and training professionals, plumbers. You know, that joke about where's the plumber? I think the plumber's here because I can see the Mercedes in the down the street, is not necessarily true for those starting out. Construction, labourers, real estate, even real estate sales agents, those things. What we did was on a 30% income, average first home loan, average medium rents and average rent for a house. Most, apart from the legal profession, found that equation not affordable. We then moved that up to 50%, and what sort of occupations were still sitting there as difficult to afford the average first home loan or the median rents for a unit or the median rent for a house. You had hairdressers, child carers, cleaners and laundry workers, hospitality workers, prison and security officers, construction and mining labourers, automotive electricians, and real estate sales agents, still measuring that even at 50% or below their income, they are needing, well, basically they're needing more than 50% of their income to, again, finance their average first home loan, medium rents for a unit, and medium rent for a house. So it's starting to get this, excuse me, bigger picture in relation to affordability of the occupations. Then if you move to locations of poor and affordable housing in high employment opportunity. Now this says, and sometimes you often hear federal politicians say, they need to go where the jobs are. These unemployed need to actually travel over there and they'll get housing and they'll get a job and thus they'll get housing. So one of these studies is in relation to where were there areas of high employment opportunity and what did we see there. So the study identified occupations where it's most likely job seekers will find work following periods of unemployment. The study identified these occupations, and what we did was we had to look at where was the highest employment growth of these occupations in what areas. Used the census data, used to find the high density of these populations, and then we had to look at the rent levels and average incomes for these occupations and had to look at where we got to there. So let me explain. So the occupations most likely for job seekers leaving unemployment, that is leaving from unemployment into employment, those list of jobs were carers and aides, cleaners and laundry workers, sales assistants, factory process workers, store persons and labourers. So a lot of similarity to the earlier study that I showed, and these are the ones in which these are the occupations most likely, if I'm unemployed, that I'll enter into. Early findings, and this study is still yet to be published, but early findings is that in all 40 regions located of high employment, where they're most likely to find employment, housing is unaffordable for the job seekers. It's likely to be a key factor in relation to assisting job seekers to gain employment, and workers in some occupations are noticeably more likely to pay more than half their income into that rent for the employment opportunities. So who are the winners, so to speak? Carers and aides need to spend more than half of income on rent in 19 of the 40 areas. So those 40 areas were showing the highest possibility of employment of that profession and against their affordable housing. Carers and aides need to spend more than half of the income on rent in 19 of those 40 areas. Cleaners and laundry workers would need to spend half on rent in 23 of those 40 areas. And sales assistants and salespersons would need to spend more than half of income on rent in 32 of those 40 areas. So again, another picture, another window to look through in relation to another story about housing affordability. So what are the themes to the study? Such studies help to highlight the wider effects of housing costs across Australian society. I'm not sure if you plant your whole advocacy campaigning position amongst these studies as the centre point. But I think it helps to tell the story about housing stress across the community and how we need to actually, I think, alert government to actually, this is a social policy issue that's now drifting right into mainstream Australian community. It's the employed, it's the underemployed, as well as the unemployed that are suffering housing stress. And it actually gives rise or challenges the notion of the call that let's just send the non-mining states unemployed off to the mining states unemployed, and they'll be able to get work. But it actually poses a new and equally significant risk, and that is, will they still be able to afford their housing? Some concluding thoughts. Studies such as these are crucial for the national advocacy. It adds another story. And I think one of the issues that later this afternoon we'll be talking about is the need to starting to throw new narratives at this story in relation to housing affordability. To get some traction, to get some, not only traction, but actually to get some attention in relation to government. Now, I tend to think that at the moment government's an ambivalent thinker on housing affordability. There's certainly not much sign for improvement of the national election platforms I can see coming. Maybe something will happen coming on, getting closer to the election, but I think there's an ambivalence in government. Now, there's a reason why there's an ambivalence in government. Maybe the housing policy is too complex, or there's too many too many forces that are not in control of government, and thus they find, well, you know, it's what can we really do? Can we change the market or not? Or they're thinking, is this one of the issues that rate as a national social policy issue of concern? And it's surprising that along probably with Indigenous health and welfare, what would be the next two social policy issues of national concern? And it'd be striking to see housing not one of those as the emerging story in relation to the issues around New Start and housing affordability, the issues even what we're posing here about employment and housing affordability are starting to take form. Housing ministers get it. I think they do get it, but they need our help to convince their colleagues. I think housing ministers individually get it, but they haven't got that sweeping will of support around them, around the cabinet table, and certainly need such as yourselves, such as campaigns like Australians for Affordable Housing, such as ACOS and other bodies to bring pressure to this issue. And I think housing affordabilities need new narratives to keep the feet to the fire. We need to continue to tell the story of housing affordability here in this country, or inaffordability. So before you go, or before I go, support the campaign. We've got plans running up to this election. Get in touch, and participating in this lead-up would be most welcome. Help find people who could share and tell their story to the media, because we're a campaign to tell their story in relation to housing affordability, and see if you can become a financial supporter to keep the campaign rolling along up to the election and thereafter. Thanks very much for your time.